Before we dive into this story, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. And don't forget to rate this tale from 0 to 10 at the end. Now, let's begin. The email notification pinged on Madison Turner's phone just as she was pouring her third cup of instant coffee that morning. The apartment was quiet, except for the hum of her ancient laptop and the occasional honk from the street below. She glanced at the screen, half expecting another rejection from one of the dozen freelance gigs she'd applied to that week. Instead, the subject line read, "Quick dog sitting job, $500 for the weekend." Madison nearly choked on her coffee. $500? For a weekend? She clicked open the email so fast her thumb cramped. The message was brief, almost curt. "Need someone to watch my dog, Max, from Friday evening through Sunday night. My regular sitter canceled. House is in Riverside Heights. Experience preferred, but not required. Interested? Contact Julia at this number." Riverside Heights. Madison let out a low whistle. That was the neighborhood where doctors, lawyers, and tech executives lived in houses that looked like they belonged in architecture magazines. She'd driven through once, just out of curiosity, and felt like she'd entered a different universe. Her own apartment, a cramped studio with a leaky faucet and a radiator that clanked like a haunted prison cell, was a world away from that kind of luxury. Still, $500 was $500. That would cover her overdue electric bill, her student loan payment, and maybe, just maybe, leave enough for groceries that didn't come from the clearance rack. Madison grabbed her phone and typed out a reply before she could overthink it. "Hi, Julia. I'm very interested. I love dogs, and I'm available all weekend. Happy to provide references." She hit send and exhaled. 3 minutes later, her phone buzzed. "Great. Can you come by Friday at 6 p.m. for a quick walkthrough?" The address followed, and Madison's heart did a little flip. This was actually happening. She replied with a thumbs-up emoji and a confirmation, then immediately started pacing her apartment. What do you wear to a millionaire's house to dog sit? Business casual? No, that's weird. Jeans and a sweater? Too casual. Oh God. What if the dog is one of those fancy breeds that only eats organic, hand-prepared meals? What if I mess this up? Friday arrived faster than Madison expected, probably because she'd spent the previous 2 days spiraling between excitement and dread. She stood outside the address Julia had given her, staring up at a 3-story modern masterpiece of glass, steel, and pale stone. The front yard alone was bigger than her entire apartment building. A sleek black gate stood between her and the front door, and for a moment, Madison wondered if she should just turn around and go home. But then the gate buzzed open, and a woman's voice crackled through the intercom. "Come on in, Madison." Madison walked up the stone pathway, her sneakers squeaking slightly against the polished surface. The front door opened before she could knock, and a woman in her mid-30s appeared, dressed in a crisp white blouse and tailored pants. She had the kind of effortless elegance that made Madison acutely aware of the coffee stain on her own jacket. "You must be Madison. I'm Julia, the house manager. Come in, let me show you around." The interior of the house was even more stunning than the outside. Marble floors stretched out beneath a vaulted ceiling, and a massive chandelier hung above the entryway, casting soft golden light across the space. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of a perfectly manicured backyard with a pool that sparkled in the late afternoon sun. Madison tried not to gape, but it was impossible. She'd never been inside a house like this. It felt more like a luxury hotel than someone's home. "This is the living room," Julia said, gesturing to a space filled with sleek leather furniture and abstract art that probably cost more than Madison's car. "Kitchen is through here." She led Madison into a kitchen that looked like something out of a cooking show. Marble countertops, stainless steel appliances, a wine fridge, and an island big enough to host a dinner party. "There's plenty of food in the fridge. Help yourself to anything. Mr. Calloway won't mind. Mr. Calloway. So that was the owner's name. Madison filed that away, wondering what kind of person lived in a house like this. Probably some tech CEO or hedge fund manager who spent more time on yachts than at home. Julia continued the tour, showing her the guest room where she'd be staying, the bathroom with a tub that could double as a small swimming pool, and finally, the backyard, where Max was currently lounging on a cushioned outdoor sofa. Madison's heart melted the moment she saw him. Max was a golden retriever, his fur a warm shade of honey, his eyes soft and brown. He looked up as they approached, his tail wagging lazily. "He's a sweetheart," Julia said, kneeling down to scratch behind his ears. "Eats twice a day, morning and evening. Food's in the pantry. He likes his walks, but he's not too demanding. Just don't let him chew on the furniture. He has a thing for couch cushions." Madison crouched down, extending her hand for Max to sniff. He leaned forward, his wet nose brushing her palm, and then he licked her fingers enthusiastically. She laughed, the tension in her chest easing. "Okay, Max, we're going to be best friends this weekend." Julia smiled approvingly. "I think you'll do just fine. Mr. Calloway will be back Sunday night. If there's any emergency, my number's on the fridge. Otherwise, just make yourself at home." Make yourself at home. Madison repeated the words in her head as Julia left, the sound of her heels clicking against the marble floor fading into the distance. The front door closed with a soft thud, and suddenly, Madison was alone in a house that probably cost more than she'd earned in her entire lifetime. She looked down at Max, who was now sitting at her feet, his tail thumping against the ground. "All right, buddy, let's not break anything." The first evening went smoothly. Madison fed Max, took him for a walk around the neighborhood, which felt like strolling through a movie set, and then settled onto the couch with a bowl of pasta she'd found in the fridge. Max curled up beside her, his head resting on her lap, and for the first time in weeks, Madison felt a strange sense of peace. The house was quiet, almost serene, and the weight of her usual stress, bills, deadlines, job applications, seemed to lift, if only temporarily. Saturday morning started just as well. Madison woke up in the guest room, which had the softest bed she'd ever slept in, and made herself a cup of coffee using an espresso machine that looked like it belonged in a cafe. She took Max for another walk, this time stopping to let him play in the backyard. He chased a tennis ball with boundless energy, his tail wagging so hard his entire body wiggled. Madison laughed, snapping a photo on her phone. If dog sitting was always this easy, she'd do it every weekend. But then, things started to go wrong. It began with the living room. Madison had left Max alone for just 10 minutes while she went upstairs to grab her phone charger. When she came back down, she found him standing on the couch, a decorative pillow clamped between his teeth. "Max, no." She rushed over, trying to pull the pillow away, but he thought it was a game. He tugged back, his tail wagging, and the pillow tore with a loud rip. Feathers exploded into the air, drifting down like snow. Madison stared in horror as the living room transformed into a scene from a pillow fight gone wrong. Feathers covered the couch, the floor, even the abstract painting on the wall. Max dropped the pillow, looking immensely pleased with himself, and barked once as if to say, "Wasn't that fun?" Madison sank onto the couch, her head in her hands. "Oh my God, I'm going to get sued." She spent the next hour trying to clean up the mess, vacuuming Feathers, and stuffing the torn pillow into a trash bag. But the damage was done. The pillow, which had probably cost more than her monthly rent, was destroyed. Madison made a mental note to find a replacement before Mr. Calloway came home, though she had no idea where one even bought pillows that expensive. Probably some boutique with a French name and a waiting list. But the pillow incident was just the beginning. Later that afternoon, While Madison was in the kitchen making lunch, Max decided to explore. She heard a crash from the living room and ran in to find him standing on the coffee table, his paws planted on either side of a now shattered glass vase. Water and flowers were strewn across the table, dripping onto the floor. Max looked at her, his tail wagging, completely oblivious to the destruction he'd caused. "Max, down." Madison's voice was firm, but inside, she was panicking. The vase had been beautiful, probably handmade, and definitely expensive. She grabbed a towel and started mopping up the water, carefully picking up the broken glass. Her hands were shaking. This was turning into a disaster. She could already imagine Mr. Calloway's reaction when he came home to find his house in ruins. She'd be lucky if he didn't press charges. By Saturday evening, Madison was exhausted. She'd managed to clean up most of the mess, but the house no longer looked pristine. There were faint scratches on the hardwood floor where Max had skidded while playing, a small stain on the rug from where he'd knocked over her coffee, and the living room still smelled faintly of wet dog, despite her best efforts to air it out. She collapsed onto the couch, Max curling up beside her, and let out a long, weary sigh. What have I gotten myself into? Sunday morning brought a new crisis, and this one was entirely Madison's fault. She'd woken up late, her alarm somehow silenced during the night, and stumbled downstairs in a groggy haze. Max was already awake, standing by the back door with an expectant look. Right. Morning walk. Madison pulled on her jacket and clipped the leash to his collar, and they headed out into the cool morning air. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of quiet that only existed in places where people had enough money to insulate themselves from the noise of the world. Madison walked Max down the tree-lined street, letting him sniff at every mailbox and fire hydrant. Her mind wandered, replaying the disasters of the previous day. Maybe it's not that bad. Maybe Mr. Calloway won't even notice. The pillow was just one pillow, and the vase, well, accidents happen. Right. But when they returned to the house, Madison's fragile sense of optimism shattered. She'd forgotten to latch the back gate properly, and Max, ever the opportunist, had bolted the moment she unclipped his leash. Madison watched in horror as he raced across the backyard, straight toward the pool. "Max, no. Stop!" Her voice was drowned out by the splash as he leaped into the water, paddling around with gleeful abandon. Madison ran to the edge of the pool, her heart pounding. "Max, come here, now!" But Max was having the time of his life, doing laps like a furry Olympic swimmer. Madison groaned, kicking off her shoes and rolling up her jeans. She couldn't leave him in there. What if he got tired and couldn't get out? What if he drowned? She'd never forgive herself. Taking a deep breath, she stepped into the pool. The water was cold, shockingly so, and Madison gasped as it soaked through her clothes. She waded toward Max, who was now paddling in circles, his tongue lolling out in a doggy grin. "Come here, you little troublemaker." She grabbed his collar and guided him toward the steps, both of them dripping wet by the time they climbed out. Max shook himself off, spraying water everywhere, and Madison couldn't help but laugh, despite the absurdity of the situation. "At least you're having fun." Back inside, Madison wrapped herself in a towel and changed into dry clothes, leaving a trail of wet footprints across the marble floor. She tried to mop them up, but the towel just smeared the water around. The house, which had been immaculate when she arrived, now looked like it had been hit by a small tornado. Feathers in the living room, scratches on the floor, a missing vase, and now puddles of pool water in the entryway. Madison sat on the kitchen floor, her back against the cabinets, and laughed until tears streamed down her face. "I'm so fired." But then she remembered something Julia had said. "If there's any emergency, my number's on the fridge." Madison stood up, walked over to the fridge, and found the number scribbled on a sticky note. She hesitated, her thumb hovering over the call button. Was this an emergency? Or was this just her being a catastrophically bad dog sitter? In the end, she decided not to call. What could Julia do from wherever she was? Madison would just have to fix this herself. She spent the rest of Sunday cleaning. She scrubbed the floors until they gleamed, vacuumed every corner of the living room, and even tried to rearrange the furniture to hide the scratches. She found a decorative bowl in the kitchen and placed it on the coffee table where the vase used to be, hoping it would blend in. The pillow was a lost cause, so she fluffed the remaining ones and strategically positioned them to cover the empty spot. By the time she finished, the house looked better, but it was far from perfect. Madison glanced at the clock. 6 p.m. Mr. Calloway would be home any minute, her stomach twisted with dread. She'd rehearsed what she would say a dozen times, but every version sounded worse than the last. "Hi, I'm Madison, and I destroyed your house." Or, "Sorry about the vase, the pillow, and the general chaos. I'm sure you can afford replacements." She groaned, running a hand through her hair. Why did I think I could do this? At exactly 6:30, the front door opened. Madison's heart leaped into her throat. She stood in the living room, Max sitting obediently at her feet, and watched as a man stepped inside. He was tall, probably in his early 30s, with dark hair that fell slightly over his forehead and sharp green eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He wore a tailored gray suit, the kind that screamed expensive, and carried a leather briefcase in one hand. This was Mr. Calloway. He paused in the entryway, his gaze sweeping over the living room. Madison held her breath, waiting for the inevitable explosion. But instead of anger, his expression shifted to something closer to confusion. He set down his briefcase and walked further into the room, his eyes landing on the coffee table where the decorative bowl now sat. His lips twitched, as if he were suppressing a smile. Then he looked at Madison, and for the first time, she saw the faintest glimmer of amusement in his eyes. "You must be Madison." His voice was deep and smooth, with a hint of something she couldn't quite place. Relief? Amusement? She couldn't tell. She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. He glanced around the room again, his eyes lingering on the strategically placed pillows and the faint scratches on the floor. Then he crouched down, holding out a hand to Max, who immediately bounded over, tail wagging furiously. "Hey, buddy, miss me?" Madison watched in stunned silence as Max licked his face, his entire body wiggling with joy. Mr. Calloway laughed, a sound that was warm and genuine, and scratched behind Max's ears. "Good boy." He stood up, brushing off his suit, and turned back to Madison. "So, how was he? Any trouble?" "Any trouble." Madison almost laughed. She opened her mouth to launch into an apology, to confess every disaster, but the words stuck in her throat. He didn't look angry. He looked almost amused, as if he already knew something had gone wrong and didn't care. She swallowed hard and decided to go with honesty. He was great. Really sweet. But, there were a few incidents. He raised an eyebrow, his lips curving into a half-smile. "That sounds ominous." Madison felt her cheeks heat up. She gestured to the coffee table. "I'm really sorry. But Max knocked over the vase that was here. It shattered, and I tried to clean it up, but I couldn't save it. And there was a pillow," she pointed to the couch, "that he kind of destroyed. I was going to replace it, but I didn't know where to get one like that. And," she trailed off, realizing she was rambling. Mr. Calloway walked over to the couch, examining the rearranged pillows. Then he picked one up, revealing the empty spot underneath. He turned to her, his expression unreadable. "And the pool?" Madison blinked. "How did he—" She glanced at the entryway, where a faint water stain still lingered on the marble. "Oh, right." He jumped in this morning, and I had to go in after him. I tried to clean up, but she gestured helplessly at the floor. For a long moment, Mr. Calloway didn't say anything. Madison braced herself for the worst, her mind already calculating how much of her paycheck she'd lose to cover the damages. But then, to her shock, he laughed. It wasn't a polite chuckle or a forced smile. It was a genuine, full-bodied laugh that echoed through the room. Max jumped in the pool? He shook his head, grinning. Of course he did. That dog has a death wish when it comes to water. Madison stared at him, completely thrown off. "You're not mad?" He looked at her, his green eyes twinkling with amusement. "Mad? Why would I be mad? The vase was from a hotel gift shop. Cost me $20. And the pillow," he picked up one of the remaining ones. "My sister bought these. I've been meaning to get rid of them for months. Too fluffy." Madison let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "So, I'm not fired?" "Fired?" He laughed again. "Madison, you kept Max alive and happy for an entire weekend. That's more than I can say for half the sitters I've hired. One guy let him eat an entire box of chocolates. Another locked him outside because he was shedding. You," he gestured around the room, "just had a little chaos. That's Max's specialty." Madison felt a smile tugging at her lips despite herself. "So, you're really okay with all of this?" "Completely." He walked over to the kitchen, pulling open the fridge. "In fact, I'd say you handled it better than most people would." "Did Julia tell you Max has a talent for destruction?" Madison followed him, her nerves finally starting to settle. "She mentioned he likes to chew on couch cushions." Mr. Calloway pulled out a bottle of water and leaned against the counter, his expression relaxed. "That's putting it mildly. Last month, he ate through a set of throw pillows, knocked over a bookshelf, and somehow managed to turn on the sprinkler system in the middle of the night. This," he gestured to the living room, "is nothing." Madison laughed, the tension in her chest finally easing. "Okay, now I feel a little better." He took a sip of water, studying her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You know, most people would have called Julia in a panic or just left. But you stayed, cleaned up, and even tried to cover the evidence. That takes guts." "Or desperation," Madison admitted. "I really needed this job." "Well, you've got it." In fact, he set down the bottle, his tone shifting slightly. "I could use someone like you on a more permanent basis. Julia's great, but she's not always available, and Max clearly likes you. Interested?" Madison blinked, certain she'd misheard. "You want me to dog sit regularly?" He nodded. "Same rate. Maybe more if you're willing to take him on longer trips. I travel a lot for work, and Max hates kennels." Madison's mind raced. $500 a weekend, potentially more, and all she had to do was hang out with an adorable, if slightly chaotic, golden retriever in a house that was nicer than any place she'd ever lived. It was almost too good to be true. She looked at Max, who was now sprawled on the kitchen floor, his tail thumping lazily. Then she looked back at Mr. Calloway, who was watching her with a patient, almost hopeful expression. "I'd love to." "Great." He smiled, and for the first time, Madison noticed how warm his smile was, how it softened the sharp angles of his face. "We'll work out the details later. For now," he glanced at his watch, "I owe you for this weekend. Let me grab your payment." He disappeared upstairs, and Madison stood in the kitchen, trying to process what had just happened. Not only had she not been fired, she'd been offered a regular job. And Mr. Calloway, far from being the angry, uptight millionaire she'd imagined, was actually kind of nice. And funny. And okay, maybe a little handsome. Max barked once, snapping her out of her thoughts. She crouched down, scratching behind his ears. "Looks like we're going to be spending a lot more time together, buddy." Max licked her hand, and Madison couldn't help but smile. Maybe this weekend hadn't been a disaster after all. Maybe, just maybe, it was the start of something good. By the time Ethan Calloway came back downstairs, Madison had composed herself enough to stop grinning like an idiot. He handed her an envelope, and when she peeked inside, she saw not just the promised $500, but an extra $100. Her eyes widened. This is too much. Consider it hazard pay, Ethan said with a slight smirk. Max clearly put you through your paces. Madison laughed, tucking the envelope into her bag. Well, he definitely kept me on my toes. Ethan leaned against the kitchen counter, his posture relaxed in a way that surprised her. Most wealthy people she'd encountered, admittedly not many, carried themselves with a certain stiffness, as if they were always performing. But Ethan seemed genuinely at ease, his tie loosened, his jacket draped over a chair. "So, Madison," he said, his tone conversational, "what do you do when you're not rescuing golden retrievers from pools?" She hesitated, unsure how much to share. "I'm a freelance graphic designer, or at least I'm trying to be. Work's been a little slow lately, which is why I jumped at the dog-sitting gig." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. Graphic design. That's a tough field to break into. "Tell me about it," Madison said with a rueful smile. "Everyone wants experience, but no one wants to hire you to get that experience. It's like some kind of cosmic joke." "I know the feeling," Ethan said, surprising her. "When I first started my company, I couldn't get anyone to take me seriously. Too young, too inexperienced, too risky. It took years to prove myself." Madison blinked. "You started a company?" "What kind?" He smiled faintly. "Tech. Software development, mostly. We design enterprise solutions for businesses, streamline operations, that kind of thing. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills." Pays the bills. Madison glanced around the sprawling kitchen, the marble countertops, the state-of-the-art appliances. "Yeah, I'd say you're doing okay." Ethan laughed, a sound that was becoming increasingly familiar and pleasant. "Fair point. But it wasn't always like this. 5 years ago, I was eating ramen in a studio apartment and praying my investors wouldn't bail." Madison found herself leaning against the counter, genuinely interested. What changed? Persistence? Luck? "A little bit of both," Ethan said. "I had one product that took off and suddenly people were paying attention. But it's exhausting, honestly. The constant pressure to innovate, to stay ahead. Sometimes I miss the simplicity of just writing code in my apartment." Madison studied him, seeing something she hadn't expected: vulnerability. It was strange, hearing someone who seemed to have everything admit that it wasn't always easy. "I guess success comes with its own set of problems." "Exactly," Ethan said, meeting her gaze. "But enough about me. Tell me about your design work. What kind of projects do you take on?" Madison felt a flicker of excitement. She loved talking about her work, even if it didn't always pay the bills. Mostly branding. Logos, websites, social media graphics. I like helping small businesses find their identity, you know? Giving them something that feels authentic. Ethan's eyes lit up with interest. "That's actually really cool. Do you have a portfolio?" Madison pulled out her phone, scrolling through her saved projects. She showed him a logo she'd designed for a local bakery, a website mock-up for a yoga studio, and a series of Instagram posts for a vintage clothing shop. Ethan leaned closer, his attention fully focused on her screen. "These are great. Really clean. Professional. Have you thought about reaching out to startups? A lot of them need this kind of work, but don't have the budget for big agencies." "I've tried," Madison admitted, "but it's hard to get noticed. Everyone's competing for the same clients." Ethan nodded slowly, as if considering something. Then he looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "What if I connected you with a few people? I know some founders who are always looking for designers. No promises, but I could put in a word." Madison's heart skipped. Are you serious? Completely. You've got talent. It'd be a waste not to help you get it out there. Madison felt a surge of gratitude mixed with disbelief. Why would you do that? Ethan shrugged, his smile easy. Why not? You took great care of Max, even when things went sideways. That tells me you're reliable. And honestly, he glanced at Max, who was now snoring softly on the floor. I like supporting people who are trying to make something of themselves. I remember what it was like to struggle. For a moment, Madison didn't know what to say. She'd expected this weekend to be a simple transaction. Watch a dog, get paid, go home. But Ethan was offering her something more, an opportunity, a connection, maybe even a chance to turn her struggling freelance career into something real. Thank you, she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. That means a lot. Ethan's expression softened. Don't thank me yet. Let's see if any of my contacts actually follow through. But I have a good feeling about it. They stood there in the kitchen, the evening light filtering through the windows, and for the first time in months, Madison felt a spark of hope. This weekend had been chaotic, messy, and completely unexpected. But maybe, just maybe, it was exactly what she needed. Over the next few days, Madison found herself thinking about Ethan more than she probably should have. It wasn't just the money or the potential job connections, though those were definitely appealing. It was the way he'd laughed when she confessed Max had destroyed his house, the way he'd leaned in to look at her portfolio, genuinely interested, the way his smile reached his eyes, warm and unguarded. Stop it, Madison muttered to herself as she sat at her cramped desk, staring at a half-finished logo design. He's a client, a very wealthy, very out-of-your-league client. But on Wednesday afternoon, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Hi, Madison. This is Ethan Calloway. Hope it's okay that I got your number from Julia. I wanted to follow up on those connections I mentioned. Are you free for coffee this week? Madison stared at the message, her heart doing an annoying little flip. Coffee? With Ethan? Was this professional? Personal? She had no idea, but she typed back quickly before she could overthink it. Hi, Ethan. Coffee sounds great. When works for you? How about Friday afternoon? There's a place near my office. Low-key, good espresso. I can send you the address. Madison agreed, and for the rest of the week, she oscillated between excitement and nerves. She told herself it was just a business meeting, a chance to network. But she still spent an embarrassing amount of time picking out an outfit, something casual but polished, and rehearsing what she'd say. Friday arrived, and Madison found herself standing outside a sleek, minimalist cafe in the financial district. The place was exactly as Ethan had described, low-key but clearly expensive, with exposed brick walls, vintage light fixtures, and a menu that listed pour-over coffee and artisanal pastries. She spotted Ethan at a corner table, already nursing a cup of something dark and aromatic. He looked up as she approached, his face breaking into a smile that made her stomach flip. Madison, glad you could make it. He stood, pulling out a chair for her. Madison sat, feeling suddenly self-conscious. Thanks for inviting me. I wasn't sure if you were serious about the whole connection thing. Completely serious, Ethan said, sliding a piece of paper across the table. I reached out to 3 founders I know. All of them said they'd be interested in seeing your portfolio. One of them, Sarah Chen, is launching a new app and needs a full rebrand. I think you'd be perfect for it. Madison picked up the paper, her eyes scanning the names and contact information. Her hands trembled slightly. Ethan, this is incredible. I don't even know what to say. Say you'll knock their socks off, Ethan said with a grin, and maybe mention that I vouched for you, just in case they need extra convincing. Madison laughed, feeling a rush of gratitude, and something else, something warmer. I will, Thank you. Really? They ordered coffee, and the conversation flowed easily. Ethan asked about her design process, and Madison found herself opening up in a way she rarely did with clients. She talked about her inspirations, her frustrations, and her dreams of one day running her own design studio. Ethan listened intently, asking thoughtful questions, and offering advice that was surprisingly practical. He's not just rich, Madison thought. He's smart. And kind. And okay. Definitely. Handsome. At one point, Ethan's phone buzzed, and he glanced at the screen with a sigh. Sorry, work emergency. I need to take this. Madison waved him off. Go ahead. Ethan stepped outside, and Madison took the opportunity to study the cafe, the carefully curated decor, the well-dressed patrons. This was Ethan's world, polished, professional, successful. And here she was, a struggling freelancer who'd accidentally destroyed his living room. The contrast felt almost laughable. But when Ethan returned, his expression apologetic, he didn't seem to notice or care about the differences between them. Sorry about that. Where were we? Madison smiled. You were telling me about the time Max ate your laptop charger. Ethan laughed, the sound rich and genuine. Oh, right. That was a fun day. He launched into the story, and Madison found herself laughing so hard she had to wipe tears from her eyes. As they finished their coffee, Ethan glanced at his watch. I hate to cut this short, but I've got a meeting in 20 minutes. But I'd love to do this again. Maybe next time we can skip the business talk and just hang out. Madison's heart skipped. Just hang out. That sounded decidedly less professional. She tried to keep her voice casual. I'd like that. Great. I'll text you. Ethan stood, and for a moment, Madison thought he might hug her. Instead, he held out his hand, and she shook it, feeling the warmth of his palm against hers. It was a simple gesture, but it sent a jolt through her. As she watched him walk away, his figure disappearing into the crowd, Madison realized something that both thrilled and terrified her. She was starting to fall for Ethan Calloway, and she had absolutely no idea what to do about it. That night, lying in her tiny apartment, Madison replayed the afternoon in her head. The way Ethan had smiled at her, the way he'd leaned in when she talked, as if her words genuinely mattered, the way his eyes had crinkled at the corners when he laughed. She groaned, pulling a pillow over her face. This is a terrible idea, she muttered. He's a millionaire. You're a broke freelancer. This is not a romantic comedy. This is real life. But her phone buzzed, and she grabbed it, her heart racing. A text from Ethan. Thanks for coffee today. I had a great time. Let's do it again soon. And by the way, Max misses you. I think you made a lasting impression. Madison smiled, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She typed and deleted 3 different responses before settling on something simple. I had a great time, too. Tell Max I miss him, and thanks again for everything. His reply came almost instantly. Anytime, Madison. Sleep well. She stared at the message, her chest warm. Maybe this was a terrible idea. Maybe she was setting herself up for heartbreak. But for the first time in a long time, Madison felt like something good was happening, and she wasn't about to let fear stop her from seeing where it might lead. The following week, Madison threw herself into work with a renewed sense of purpose. She reached out to the contacts Ethan had given her, and within days, she had 3 solid leads. Sarah Chen, the app founder, responded almost immediately, asking to see her portfolio and schedule a call. Madison spent hours refining her presentation, making sure every design was perfect, every detail polished. When they finally spoke, Sarah was enthusiastic, warm, and by the end of the call, Madison had landed her first major contract in months. She texted Ethan immediately. I got the job with Sarah. Thank you so much for the introduction. His response came within minutes. "That's amazing. I knew you'd nail it. Congrats, Madison. Let me know if you want to celebrate." Madison stared at the message, her pulse quickening. Celebrate. That sounded suspiciously like a date. Or maybe she was just reading too much into it. She typed back, trying to sound casual. "I'd love to." "When are you free? How about this Saturday? I'll pick you up at 7. Wear something comfortable." Madison's heart did a little somersault. Saturday. That was 4 days away. 4 days to figure out what comfortable meant in Ethan's world, and 4 days to convince herself this wasn't a big deal. "Sounds perfect," she replied, adding a smiley face emoji before she could stop herself. The next few days crawled by. Madison worked on Sarah's project, sketching logos and experimenting with color palettes. But her mind kept drifting to Saturday. She tried on half her wardrobe, settling on jeans, a soft sweater, and ankle boots, an outfit that felt like her, but still looked put together. On Saturday evening, she was pacing her apartment, checking her phone every few minutes, when a text came through. "I'm outside." Madison grabbed her bag and headed downstairs, her nerves jangling. Ethan's car, a sleek black sedan that probably cost more than her entire year's rent, was parked at the curb. He stepped out as she approached, dressed in jeans and a dark green Henley that made his eyes look even more striking. "You look great," he said, his smile warm and genuine. Madison felt her cheeks heat. "Thanks. You too." He opened the passenger door for her, and Madison slid into the leather seat, trying not to gawk at the interior. The car smelled like new leather and something faintly woodsy, probably his cologne. Ethan got in, starting the engine with a smooth hum. "So, where are we going?" Madison asked, buckling her seatbelt. "You said to wear something comfortable, so I'm assuming we're not going to a 5-star restaurant." Ethan grinned. "You'll see." "It's a surprise?" Madison raised an eyebrow but didn't press. As they drove, Ethan asked about her week, and Madison found herself telling him about Sarah's project, the challenges she was facing, and the small victories along the way. Ethan listened, offering advice and encouragement, and Madison realized how easy it was to talk to him. There was no pretense, no judgment, just genuine interest. After about 20 minutes, they pulled into a parking lot near the waterfront. Madison looked around, confused. "Where are we?" Ethan turned off the engine, his eyes twinkling with amusement. "Mini golf." Madison blinked. "Mini golf? You're kidding," he laughed. "Nope. I figured we could use a break from all the serious stuff. Plus, I haven't played in years, and I'm pretty sure I'm terrible at it now." Madison couldn't help but laugh. "Okay, this is officially the last thing I expected." Ethan got out of the car, and Madison followed, still smiling. The mini golf course was charming, with windmills, loop-de-loops, and brightly colored obstacles. It was the kind of place families brought their kids on weekends, not where millionaire CEOs took their, well, whatever Madison was to him. "This is perfect," Madison said, surprised by how much she meant it. They grabbed clubs and scorecards, and the game began. Ethan, true to his word, was hilariously bad. His first shot sent the ball careening off course, nearly hitting a fake flamingo. Madison doubled over with laughter. "Okay, I take it back. You're worse than terrible." Ethan grinned, unbothered. "Hey, I warned you. I'm out of practice." Madison lined up her shot, tapping the ball gently. It rolled smoothly through the windmill and into the hole. She looked up, triumphant. "Hole in one." "Show off," Ethan said, but his tone was teasing. They moved through the course, trading jokes and playful banter. At one point, Ethan's ball got stuck in a sand trap, and Madison had to help him fish it out, both of them laughing so hard they could barely stand. By the time they reached the final hole, Madison was ahead by a ridiculous margin, and Ethan was pretending to sulk. "I think you hustled me," he said, narrowing his eyes. "Admit it. You're a mini golf pro." Madison grinned. "I plead the fifth." They returned their clubs and walked along the waterfront, the evening air cool and refreshing. The sun was setting, casting the sky in shades of pink and orange, and the water shimmered like glass. Ethan glanced at her, his expression softening. "I'm glad you said yes to tonight. I wasn't sure if you'd be into mini golf. Are you kidding?" "This was perfect," Madison said honestly. "I've been so stressed lately. And this," she gestured to the water, "the fading light, just what I needed." Ethan smiled, and for a moment, they just stood there, side by side, watching the sunset. Then he turned to her, his voice quieter. "Madison, can I ask you something?" "Sure," Madison said, her heart suddenly pounding. "Do you think this," he gestured between them, "is just a professional thing? Or is there something more here?" Madison's breath caught. She'd been wondering the same thing, but hearing him say it out loud made it real, terrifying and thrilling all at once. "I don't know," she admitted. "I mean, I like spending time with you. A lot. But you're you, and I'm—" She trailed off, unsure how to finish. "You're you," Ethan said, his gaze steady. "And that's exactly why I like spending time with you. You don't treat me like I'm some untouchable CEO. You're real, funny, talented, and you care about Max, which is a huge bonus." Madison laughed, the tension in her chest easing. "Max is pretty great." Ethan stepped closer, his voice soft. "So, what do you say? Can we see where this goes? No pressure, no expectations. Just us." Madison looked up at him, her heart racing. The logical part of her brain screamed caution. This was a bad idea. They came from different worlds. But the rest of her, the part that had been laughing all evening, that felt lighter than she had in months, whispered, "Why not?" "Okay," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Let's see where this goes." Ethan's smile was slow and warm, like sunrise breaking over the horizon. "Good. Because I really like you, Madison Turner, and I have a feeling this is just the beginning." Madison smiled back, her cheeks aching from how wide her grin was. She didn't know what the future held, but standing there with Ethan, the sunset painting the sky in brilliant colors, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. They walked back to the car, their hands brushing occasionally, neither pulling away. The drive back to her apartment was filled with easy conversation and comfortable silences. When they arrived, Ethan walked her to the door, his hands in his pockets. "Thanks for tonight," Madison said. "I had a really great time." "Me too," Ethan said. "And hey, next time, maybe you can teach me how to actually play mini golf without embarrassing myself." Madison laughed. "Deal." They stood there for a moment, the air charged with unspoken possibility. Then Ethan leaned in, his lips brushing her cheek in a soft, fleeting kiss. "Good night, Madison." "Good night, Ethan," she whispered, her heart pounding. She watched as he walked back to his car, and only when he'd driven away did she let out the breath she'd been holding. Inside her apartment, Madison leaned against the door, a smile tugging at her lips. This is happening, she thought. Whatever this is, it's really happening. Over the next few weeks, Madison's life shifted in ways she hadn't anticipated. Her workload picked up significantly thanks to Sarah's project and the other leads Ethan had connected her with. She was busier than she'd been in months, but it was a good kind of busy, the kind that made her feel like she was finally building something real. And then there was Ethan. They texted daily, sharing everything from work frustrations to random memes. He'd send her photos of Max doing ridiculous things, like napping in a laundry basket or stealing socks. She'd sent him screenshots of design drafts, asking for his opinion. Their second date happened on a rainy Thursday evening. Ethan had invited her to his place for dinner, promising to cook. Madison had been skeptical. "You cook?" she'd asked over the phone. "Or do you mean you order takeout and plate it nicely?" Ethan had laughed. "I actually cook. Scout's honor." "You'll see." When Madison arrived at his house, the scent of garlic and herbs greeted her at the door. Max bounded over immediately, tail wagging furiously, and Madison knelt to scratch behind his ears. "Hey, buddy, I missed you." Ethan appeared from the kitchen, wearing an apron that said, "Kiss the cook," and holding a wooden spoon. Madison burst out laughing. "Nice apron." "It was a gift from Emily," Ethan said with a grin. "She thinks I need more personality in the kitchen." Madison followed him into the kitchen, where pots simmered on the stove, and a cutting board was covered with fresh vegetables. He wasn't kidding. He was actually cooking. "What are you making?" she asked, genuinely impressed. "Pasta primavera. Nothing fancy, but it's one of my go-tos." Ethan stirred a pot, adding a pinch of salt. "Grab a seat. Dinner'll be ready in 10. Madison perched on a stool at the island, watching as Ethan moved around the kitchen with surprising ease. He tossed pasta, sautéed vegetables, and assembled plates with the kind of focus he probably brought to his business deals. When he finally set a plate in front of her, steam rising from the perfectly twirled pasta, Madison couldn't help but be impressed. "This looks amazing." "Taste it first," Ethan said, sitting across from her. "If it's terrible, we'll order pizza." Madison took a bite, the flavors bursting on her tongue, fresh, savory, with just the right amount of garlic. Her eyes widened. "Okay, I officially take back every doubt I had. This is incredible." Ethan's grin was smug. "Told you." Madison laughed, shaking her head. "You're full of surprises, you know that?" They ate dinner, the conversation flowing as easily as it always did. Ethan told her about a disastrous investor meeting where Max had somehow gotten into the office and knocked over a tray of coffee. Madison shared a story about a client who'd asked her to design a logo featuring a unicorn riding a skateboard. I'm not even kidding. By the time they finished, Madison's sides hurt from laughing. After dinner, they moved to the living room, the same room where Max had caused chaos weeks earlier. Madison settled onto the couch, Max immediately curling up beside her. Ethan sat on the other end, a glass of wine in hand. "So," he said, his tone shifting slightly, "I've been meaning to ask, how are things going with Sarah's project?" "Really well, actually," Madison said, her eyes lighting up. "We're in the final stages, and she loves the direction we're heading. I think this could lead to more work, maybe even a long-term partnership." Ethan nodded, clearly pleased. "That's great, Madison. You deserve it." Madison felt a warmth spread through her chest. "Thanks. And I mean it, Ethan. None of this would have happened without you." Ethan set down his glass, his expression serious. "You would have gotten there eventually. I just sped things up a bit." Madison looked at him, her heart swelling. "It's more than that. You believed in me when I was struggling to believe in myself. That means everything." For a moment, they just looked at each other, the air between them thick with unspoken emotion. Then Ethan moved closer, closing the distance between them. Madison's breath hitched. He reached out, his hand gently cupping her cheek. "Can I kiss you?" he asked, his voice low. Madison nodded, unable to find her voice. Ethan leaned in, his lips brushing hers in a kiss that was soft, tentative, as if he were giving her the chance to pull away. But Madison didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned into him, her hands finding his shoulders, and the kiss deepened. It was everything she'd imagined, and more, warm, electric, and achingly tender. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that for weeks," he murmured. Madison smiled, her heart racing. "Me too." They stayed like that for a moment, wrapped in each other's warmth, before Max let out a loud snore, breaking the spell. They both laughed, the tension dissolving into something lighter. As the evening wore on, they talked about everything and nothing, their conversation meandering through childhood memories, favorite movies, and dreams for the future. Madison learned that Ethan had always wanted to travel more, but never seemed to find the time. Ethan learned that Madison had a secret love for cheesy action films and could quote half of Die Hard from memory. By the time Madison glanced at the clock, it was past midnight. "I should probably get going," she said reluctantly. Ethan walked her to the door, Max trailing behind. Madison crouched down to give Max one last scratch. "Be good, buddy." Then she stood, and Ethan pulled her into a hug, his arms wrapping around her in a way that felt both comforting and exhilarating. "Text me when you get home," he said softly. "I will," Madison promised. The drive back to her apartment felt surreal. Madison replayed the evening in her head, the dinner, the kiss, the easy intimacy that had settled between them. She'd never felt this way about anyone before, this mix of excitement and contentment, like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. When she got home, she texted Ethan, "Home safe. Tonight was perfect." His reply came almost instantly. It really was. Sweet dreams, Madison. Over the next few weeks, Madison and Ethan fell into a rhythm. They saw each other whenever their schedules allowed, which was more often than Madison had expected. Some nights, they'd go out, trying new restaurants or catching a movie. Other nights, they'd stay in, cooking together, or just watching TV with Max sprawled between them. It was simple, easy, and Madison found herself falling harder with each passing day. But as their relationship deepened, Madison couldn't shake a nagging worry. They came from such different worlds. Ethan was a successful CEO with a sprawling house and a life filled with investors, board, meetings, and high-stakes decisions. Madison was a freelancer who still worried about making rent some months. She tried not to let it bother her, but every so often, the difference would hit her, like when Ethan casually mentioned flying to New York for a day-long meeting, or when she saw an article about his company in a tech magazine. One evening, as they sat in Ethan's living room, Madison's phone buzzed with an email. She glanced at it, her stomach sinking. It was from a client, canceling a project she'd been counting on. Her face must have given something away because Ethan immediately noticed. "Everything okay?" Madison forced a smile. "Yeah, just a project fell through. No big deal." Ethan set down his drink, his brow furrowing. "Madison, talk to me. What's going on?" She hesitated, then sighed. "It's just, sometimes I feel like I'm barely keeping my head above water. I got this one big project with Sarah, and that's great, but it's not enough to feel secure. And then I look at you, and," she gestured around the room, "you've got everything figured out." Ethan reached for her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "Madison, I don't have everything figured out, not even close. And 5 years ago, I was in your exact position, terrified I'd never make it." She looked at him, wanting to believe but struggling. "But you did make it. What if I don't?" "You will," Ethan said firmly, "because you're talented, driven, and you don't give up. And if you ever need help, a connection, advice, money, I'm here. You don't have to do this alone." Madison felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back, her voice thick. "I don't want you to think I'm with you because of your money or your connections." Ethan's expression softened, and he pulled her into his arms. "Madison, I know you're not. You liked me when you thought I was just some guy whose dog wrecked his house. You didn't even know what I did for a living. That's why I trust this. Trust us." Madison buried her face in his chest, letting his words sink in. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could make this work. Spring turned to summer, and Madison's life continued to transform. Sarah's project wrapped up successfully, leading to 2 more clients who wanted her branding expertise. Her income stabilized, and for the first time in years, she wasn't living paycheck to paycheck. But more than the professional wins, it was her relationship with Ethan that filled her days with light. They'd been together for nearly 4 months, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. One Saturday morning, Ethan called her with an unusual request. "Pack a bag for the weekend. We're taking a trip." Madison, lounging in her pajamas, sat up in surprise. "A trip? Where?" "It's a surprise. Just bring comfortable clothes and maybe a swimsuit. I'll pick you up in an hour." Madison scrambled to pack, her mind racing with possibilities. An hour later, Ethan arrived, Max in tow. "We're bringing Max?" Madison asked as she climbed into the car. "Of course," Ethan said with a grin. He'd never forgive me if I left him behind. The drive took them out of the city, through rolling hills and dense forests, until they arrived at a lakeside cabin. It was rustic but charming, with a wraparound porch and a dock that stretched out over the water. Madison stepped out of the car, her breath catching. "Ethan, this is beautiful." He came around to stand beside her, slinging an arm over her shoulders. "I thought we could use a break, just the 3 of us." They spent the weekend in blissful simplicity. They hiked through the woods, Max bounding ahead with endless energy. They swam in the lake, the water cool and refreshing. At night, they sat by a fire pit, roasting marshmallows and talking until the stars filled the sky. It was the kind of weekend Madison had only seen in movies. Perfect, unhurried, filled with laughter and quiet moments that felt like forever. On their last night, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the lake, Ethan turned to her. "Madison, there's something I need to tell you." Madison's heart skipped, her mind immediately jumping to worst-case scenarios. "What is it?" Ethan took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I'm falling in love with you." Madison's breath caught. He continued, his voice steady. "I know we haven't been together that long, and maybe it's too soon to say this, but I can't keep it to myself anymore. You've changed my life, Madison. You make me happier than I've been in years." Tears welled in Madison's eyes, but this time they were tears of joy. "Ethan, I'm falling in love with you too." His face broke into the widest smile she'd ever seen, and he pulled her into a kiss that was deep, passionate, and filled with all the words they couldn't say. When they finally pulled apart, Madison rested her head on his shoulder, feeling like the luckiest person in the world. But as summer faded into fall, their relationship faced its first real test. Ethan's company was preparing to launch a major new product, and his schedule became relentless. Days would pass without them seeing each other, their communication reduced to hurried texts and late-night phone calls. Madison tried to be understanding, but the distance was hard. She missed him, missed the easy intimacy they'd built. One evening, after a particularly long week, Madison sat alone in her apartment, staring at her phone. Ethan had canceled their dinner plans for the 3rd time, citing an urgent investor meeting. She knew his work was important, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being pushed to the side. When Ethan finally called, his voice was exhausted. "Madison, I'm so sorry. This launch is killing me." "I get it," Madison said, trying to keep the frustration out of her voice. "But Ethan, I miss you. I feel like I barely see you anymore." "I know, and I hate it too," Ethan said. "But this will calm down soon. I promise." Madison wanted to believe him, but doubt crept in. What if this was their new normal? What if his work would always come first? The tension came to a head a few weeks later. Ethan had promised to attend a gallery opening with Madison, a small showcase featuring her design work alongside other local artists. It was a big deal for her, a chance to network and gain visibility. But an hour before the event, Ethan texted, "I'm so sorry. Emergency at work. I can't make it." Madison stared at the message, her chest tightening. She typed and deleted several responses before settling on, "Okay." The gallery opening was a success, but Madison couldn't fully enjoy it. Every time someone asked where her boyfriend was, she felt a pang of disappointment. By the time she got home, she was emotionally drained. She called Ethan, her voice sharper than she intended. "You promised you'd be there." "I know, and I'm sorry," Ethan said, his own frustration evident. "But Madison, this is my company. I can't just walk away when there's a crisis. And I can't just be okay with always coming second," Madison shot back. She immediately regretted the words, but it was too late. The line went silent. Then Ethan spoke, his voice quiet. "Is that really what you think? That you come second?" Madison's throat tightened. "I don't know, Ethan. Lately, it feels that way." Another silence, heavier this time. "I don't know what you want me to say," Ethan finally said. "This is my life, Madison. I can't change that." "And I'm not asking you to," Madison said, tears streaming down her face. "But I need to know that I matter too." "I do," Ethan said, his voice breaking. "You matter more than anything. But right now, I'm drowning, and I don't know how to balance it all." Madison wiped her eyes, her heart aching. "Maybe we both need some space to figure things out." The words hung in the air, painful and final. "Okay," Ethan said quietly, "if that's what you need." They ended the call, and Madison sat in the silence of her apartment, feeling like her world had just crumbled. She loved Ethan, but love wasn't always enough. The next few days were agony. Madison threw herself into work, trying to distract herself from the hollow ache in her chest. Ethan didn't reach out, and she didn't either. Both of them trapped in their own hurt and pride. But on the 5th day, a knock sounded at her door. Madison opened it to find Ethan standing there, his eyes red-rimmed, his expression raw. "Can we talk?" he asked. Madison stepped aside, letting him in. They sat on her couch, the silence heavy. "I've been thinking," Ethan began, his voice hoarse. "And you're right. I haven't been there for you the way I should have. I got so caught up in work that I forgot what really matters." Madison's eyes filled with tears. "I don't want to lose you, Ethan, but I can't keep feeling like I'm not a priority." "You are a priority," Ethan said fiercely. "You're the most important thing in my life, and I'm sorry I didn't show you that. I'm going to do better. I'm going to make time for us, even if it means saying no to meetings or delegating more. Because losing you," he shook his head, "that's not an option." Madison reached for his hand, squeezing it tightly. "I love you, Ethan, and I want this to work." "It will," Ethan said, pulling her into his arms. "I promise." They held each other, the cracks in their relationship beginning to mend. The weeks following their reconciliation were different. Ethan made good on his promise, carving out time for Madison even when his schedule was packed. He started leaving work earlier, delegating tasks to his team, and prioritizing their relationship in ways he hadn't before. Madison, in turn, tried to be more understanding of the pressures he faced, recognizing that his work wasn't just a job, but a passion he'd built from the ground up. One crisp October evening, Ethan invited Madison back to the lakeside cabin, where they'd spent that perfect summer weekend. This time, the trees were ablaze with autumn colors, and the air carried a hint of wood smoke. They arrived as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Max, as always, was thrilled to be there, racing around the property with unbridled joy. That night, after a simple dinner and a walk along the lake, Ethan led Madison out onto the dock. The stars were beginning to emerge, pinpricks of light against the deepening blue. Madison leaned against the railing, gazing out at the water. "This place is magic," she said softly. "Every time we come here, I feel like the rest of the world just falls away." Ethan stood beside her, his hand finding hers. "That's why I wanted to bring you back." He turned to face her, and Madison noticed something in his expression: nervousness, hope, love. Her heart began to race. "Madison, these past few months with you have been the best of my life. You've challenged me, supported me, and made me want to be a better person. I can't imagine my future without you in it." Madison's breath caught as Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He opened it, revealing a delicate ring with a single diamond that caught the starlight. "Madison Turner, will you marry me?" Tears streamed down Madison's face, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Ethan. Yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and they kissed under the stars, Max barking happily at their feet. It was a moment Madison would carry with her forever. Simple, beautiful, and utterly perfect. As they walked back to the cabin, hand in hand, Madison realized that her life had changed in ways she never could have imagined. It had started with a chaotic weekend dog-sitting, a job she'd taken out of desperation. And now, here she was, engaged to a man who loved her completely, building a life filled with possibility. The engagement brought a whirlwind of excitement. Madison's friends threw her a surprise party, complete with champagne and terrible karaoke. Ethan's sister Emily squealed with delight when she heard the news, immediately offering to help plan the wedding. Even Max seemed to understand something special had happened, sticking even closer to Madison than usual, if that was possible. They decided on a spring wedding, simple and intimate, just close friends and family. Madison designed their invitations herself, pouring her heart into every detail. The months leading up to the wedding were a blur of planning, laughter, and the occasional moment of stress. But through it all, Madison and Ethan leaned on each other, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. On a warm April morning, Madison stood in front of a mirror, her wedding dress, a flowing ivory gown with delicate lace sleeves, fitting her perfectly. Her best friend helped with her veil, and as Madison looked at her reflection, she felt a surge of emotion. "This is really happening," she whispered. Her friend smiled. "You deserve this, Madison. All of it." The ceremony took place in a garden overlooking the same lake where Ethan had proposed. White chairs lined a petal-strewn aisle, and an arch covered in wildflowers stood at the end. As Madison walked down the aisle, her arm linked with her father's, she saw Ethan waiting for her, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. He looked impossibly handsome in his tailored suit, but it was the expression on his face, pure, unfiltered love, that made her heart soar. They exchanged vows, their voices steady despite the emotion. Ethan promised to always make time for her, to support her dreams, and to never let a day go by without telling her he loved her. Madison promised to stand by him through every challenge, to laugh with him, and to build a life filled with joy and adventure. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan pulled Madison into a kiss that drew cheers and applause from their guests. The reception was everything Madison had hoped for, joyful, relaxed, and filled with love. They danced under string lights, ate cake that Max tried to steal, and laughed until their sides hurt. At one point, Emily stood to give a toast. When Ethan first told me about Madison, I knew she was special. Not because of anything he said, but because of the way he said it. Like he'd finally found what he'd been searching for. And Madison, thank you for loving my brother. You've made him happier than I've ever seen him. Madison wiped away tears, squeezing Ethan's hand. As the night wore on and the guests began to leave, Madison and Ethan stood alone on the edge of the garden, looking out at the lake. Madison rested her head on Ethan's shoulder. Can you believe we started with me accidentally destroying your house? Ethan laughed, the sound warm and full of love. Best disaster of my life. They stood there, wrapped in each other's warmth as the stars began to appear overhead. Madison thought back to that first weekend, the chaos, the panic, the unexpected kindness of a man she'd thought would fire her on the spot. She'd never imagined it would lead here, to a love that felt like home, to a future filled with promise. Life had a funny way of surprising you, she thought. Sometimes, the best things came from the moments you least expected. Ethan turned to her, his eyes soft. Ready to start the rest of our lives, Mrs. Calloway? Madison smiled, her heart full. More than ready. And as they walked back toward the reception, hand in hand, with Max trotting happily beside them, Madison knew that this was just the beginning. A beginning built on laughter, trust, and a love that had grown from the most unlikely of places. A chaotic weekend, a destroyed living room, and a man who'd found her chaos utterly charming. So, what did you think of Madison and Ethan's story? Drop a comment below and rate it from 0 to 10. If you loved this romantic tale, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss our next story. Check out more heartwarming love stories by clicking the videos on your screen. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.